In a twist of leadership and revelations, follow Arthur Vaquez, a charismatic and dedicated CEO, who decides to disguise himself as a receptionist at Inovatec to unravel the hidden mysteries within his own company. Swapping impeccable suits for a simple polo shirt, Arthur delves into the depths of corporate culture and discovers a reality that contradicts everything he believed in. What started as a mission to better understand his employees quickly turns into a journey filled with tension, secrets, and shocking revelations. The truth behind the curtains may change Inovatec forever, but at what cost? Discover how Arthur, facing an ethical and emotional dilemma, manages the complexities of masking his identity while simultaneously leading a radical change in corporate culture. A story of courage, transformation, and the power of a leader who isn't afraid to get directly involved to restore justice and integrity in the workplace. Arthur Vaquez was about to embark on a journey that would change his life and the culture of Inovatec forever. He, a charismatic and respected CEO, looked at his team gathered in the conference room. The lights shone brightly, reflecting the enthusiasm and anticipation on the faces of his collaborators. However, inside, Arthur was struggling with a dilemma. The company he loved so much seemed to be turning into a toxic place. He needed to discover the truth behind the heavy climate that loomed over Inovatec. "I'm going on a business trip," announced Arthur, trying to keep his voice steady despite his anxiety. "I trust each of you to maintain the standard of excellence that has brought us here." He watched his employees' reactions, noting a mix of apprehension and relief. It was time to act. With an audacious plan in mind, he said his goodbyes and withdrew. In the following days, Arthur disguised himself as Robert, an inexperienced receptionist. He swapped his impeccable suit for a simple polo shirt and dark pants and cut his hair to look more casual. Looking in the mirror before leaving home, he took a deep breath. "Focus, Robert. You're here to learn, not to be recognized," he murmured to himself. Entering the office on the first day, Arthur felt a wave of nervousness. The normally vibrant reception felt suffocating. He introduced himself to everyone with a shy smile but was met with suspicious glances. "Who is this new guy?" "I've never seen this guy before," whispered an employee to another, not realizing that the man they were judging was actually their CEO. Arthur began his journey of observation. Soon he noticed that Julia, the HR manager, had a powerful presence, but her demeanor was far from welcoming. While organizing papers at her desk, Arthur overheard a phone conversation that visibly agitated her. "We need to eliminate those who are hindering us," Julia said in a cold tone that made Arthur's heart race. "We can't allow challengers to feel comfortable here." Arthur was paralyzed. The words of Julia echoed in his mind. As someone who always believed in promoting a collaborative and fair environment, the idea of eliminating colleagues left him uneasy. He wondered what else was happening behind the curtains of the company. What could lead an HR manager to utter such threats? During lunchtime, he mingled with the team, sitting at a table with other employees. The conversation flowed, but it was soon interrupted by nervous laughter and murmurs about Julia. "She really has a blacklist," commented a young analyst, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "If you're not part of her clique, you're screwed." Arthur felt like an intruder, but curiosity kept him firm. He wanted to understand the team dynamics, what made them feel this way. Observing closely, he noted the tension between Julia and Tyler, the sales director. The atmosphere was heavy, and the disconnection between them and the team was evident. Later, while sorting some documents, Arthur heard a muffled scream coming from the meeting room. He approached and saw Tyler standing, gesticulating while disparaging a proposal presented by Beatrice, an employee who always seemed hesitant to speak up. "This won't work, Beatrice." "Stop wasting my time," he snapped, making everyone in the room shrink. Arthur felt a wave of indignation. How could a director treat a team member that way? When the meeting ended, Arthur approached Beatrice, now with tear-filled eyes. "Hey, you did your best. Don't give up," he said, using the name Robert. Beatrice looked at him with gratitude but also with suspicion. "Thank you, Robert. I just don't know if I'm good enough for this," she replied, her voice trembling. "You are more than good enough. Just remember that your voice and your ideas matter," Arthur encouraged her, not knowing that he was beginning to create a bond that would become essential in his journey. He felt he could do something about it, but for now, he needed to keep his disguise intact. What he had discovered so far was just the tip of the iceberg, and he was determined to dive deeper into the truth hidden beneath the surface of Inovatec. During lunchtime, Arthur, disguised as Robert, joined a group of employees in Inovatec's small break room. The atmosphere was cozy, but the tension in the air was palpable. The walls were adorned with photos of the team at past events, but those happy memories seemed distant. He sat at one of the tables, observing as the employees gathered in small groups. Some laughed nervously, others with concerned looks. "Did you see how Julia treated Peter earlier?" commented Luke, one of the marketing analysts, as he grabbed a piece of cake. "It seems she's only interested in keeping her favorites close." "Yeah, I heard that too," replied Carly, a graphic designer, shaking her head. "She's always surrounded by those who do what she wants. The rest of us, well, we're just numbers." Arthur felt a chill in his stomach. The words of Luke and Carly echoed the suspicions he had already harbored. He remembered the conversation he had overheard from Julia on the phone, and a restlessness began to take hold of him. Determined to understand the team dynamics better, he asked in a friendly tone. "But who are these favorites anyway?" You know, Tyler and the sales team," replied Luke, frowning. "Julia never criticizes them, even when they do something wrong. And those who don't align with them, well, it's like they don't exist." The conversation took a dark turn. Arthur listened attentively, absorbing the information. He noticed that with each complaint, his colleagues' glances became more intense, as if they were freeing themselves from a burden they had been carrying for a long time. He felt like a spy in his own company, but he knew he needed to act. The next day, while Robert was setting up the tables for breakfast, he saw Beatrice, one of the developers, enter the room with a determined but nervous look. She was carrying a notebook in her hands, and her expression was anxious. Arthur approached and said with an encouraging smile, "Hi, Beatrice, what do you have there?" "Hi, oh, it's just some ideas I had for the new project," she replied, biting her lower lip. "But I don't know if I have the courage to present them at the meeting. Tyler always interrupts when I speak." Arthur felt an urge to protect Beatrice. He remembered his own journey, and how crucial it was to have a safe space to express ideas. "You know, sometimes we need someone to support our ideas. How about you show me what you're thinking? I can help present it if you want." She looked at him, surprised. "Would you do that? But what if he doesn't like it?" "Don't worry about that. The important thing is that you believe in what you're creating. Let's talk about your ideas and see if we can figure out a way to present them in an impactful way." Beatrice's expression softened, and for a few minutes she shared her notes. Arthur was impressed with her creativity. "These ideas are incredible. You have a very good vision of what we need. Let's do this together." Before we continue with this exciting story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And tell us from which city you're watching this video in the comments. The mood in the room changed. Beatrice, previously hesitant, now seemed more confident. They laughed and exchanged ideas, while Arthur felt increasingly connected to the team. Throughout the conversation, he couldn't help but notice the number of employees who felt invisible, as if their contributions were never valued. In the following days, Robert continued to approach Beatrice, and the friendship between them grew. Arthur became an attentive ear, encouraging her to assert herself and not let others belittle her. He saw how she flourished, presenting her ideas with more vigor and starting to assert herself in the team. Over time, Arthur also began to notice a broader pattern. The oppression he felt in the interactions of Julia and Tyler was not limited just to him or Beatrice. It was a vicious cycle that affected the entire company. He was becoming more determined to break that cycle and do his part to change the culture of Inovatec. But he knew that would require courage and a careful strategy. Arthur, disguised as Robert, began to feel more and more like an intruder in his own company. He had strived to understand the internal dynamics of Inovatec, but the discovery of Edward's betrayal was a profound blow. In a corner of the office, while organizing some documents, Arthur overheard a conversation that left him paralyzed. "Do you really think he's going to stay here much longer?" said Edward, his voice low but full of disdain. "With the offers I'm getting, I can take the entire technology team with me. They tired of the way things are." Arthur hid behind a stack of papers, his mind spinning in a whirlwind of emotions. Edward, his longtime friend, was plotting something that could destabilize everything he had built at Inovatec. He clenched his fists, feeling betrayed and confused. How could Edward be so willing to sacrifice the company for personal ambition? "Edward, I don't know if you should do this," a voice commented. It was Julia, the HR manager. "The team needs stability, and you know this could end everything. They trust you." "And what does that mean?" Edward replied, sarcastic. "Is trust what we're doing here? I'm thinking about myself and my future, and you should too." Arthur felt a wave of anger and disillusionment. He wasn't sure if Julia was aware of the entire plan or if she was just trying to maintain order. The pressure Edward was putting on her was part of a larger game of manipulation, where loyalty was a scarce currency. After the conversation, Arthur decided he needed to confront Edward. He waited until they were alone in a meeting room, where the dim light illuminated the faces of the two men. "Edward," Arthur began, adopting the posture of a concerned receptionist. "We need to talk about what I heard about your intentions." Edward turned to him, the expression on Arthur's face not reflecting the disdain he was accustomed to seeing. "What are you talking about, Robert? What you heard is none of your business." "But it is, Edward," Arthur insisted, his voice firm. "If you leave, you'll take a significant part of the team with you. That's not fair. You can't just abandon what we've built together." "We built? You mean you built?" "I've been here all along, but it seems your vision doesn't include what's best for me," Edward replied, his tone now defensive. "I have a chance to do something big. I can't let this pass." Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. "You're putting your ego above the team." "That's not leadership," Edward laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. "You're going to teach me about leadership? Since when did you become an expert? You're just a receptionist now. Don't forget that." Edward's comment hit Arthur like a punch in the stomach. He had to remind himself that he was disguised, but the indignation inside him was growing. "I can be whoever I want, Edward. And you, at this moment, are not the person I believed you were." During the following days, Arthur felt the weight of Edward's betrayal accumulating. He became more aware of the interactions around him, noticing how the lack of trust and constant pressure were eroding the team's morale. Tension was in every corner, every furtive glance, and every whisper. He remembered Beatrice, who had tried to speak up, but was always interrupted or disregarded. It was time to act. Robert began to approach her, creating a safe space where she could speak openly. In a discreet conversation in a corner of the cafeteria, he asked, "Beatrice, how do you feel about what's happening on the team? She hesitated, looking around before responding. I feel that I'm not heard and that often my contribution is discarded. It's like my voice has no value. That's unacceptable, Arthur said, trying to encourage her. You have valuable ideas, and you need to believe in that. Don't let them make you feel invisible. She looked at him, surprised. Do you really think so? Sometimes I feel like it's just a lost battle. It's not a lost battle, Arthur affirmed with conviction. Change starts with small steps. If you stand up and speak, others will too. As the conversation continued, Arthur realized that he was not just disguising himself as a receptionist, but also as an agent of change. At the same time, Edward's betrayal was unfolding against a backdrop he could no longer ignore. Arthur, under the guise of Robert, decided it was time to create a space where employees could feel comfortable sharing their experiences and frustrations. He organized an informal breakfast in the break room, a cozy space decorated with plants and a large window that let in the sunlight. The aroma of fresh coffee and warm breads filled the air, drawing in the employees who were initially hesitant. One by one, they began to enter. Beatrice, who had become a close friend of Robert, was one of the first to arrive. She looked around, a bit nervous, but when she saw Robert smiling at her, her expression relaxed. Hi, Robert, what did you prepare here? Asked Beatrice with a shy smile. Hi, Beatrice, I made some toast and brought fruits. I want this to be a pleasant moment where we can talk without pressure, replied Arthur as he arranged the table. Soon, other employees began to join them. The atmosphere was light, but there was an air of expectation. Arthur observed how each one seemed hesitant to open up, especially after the tensions he had witnessed between them. He knew that to break this barrier, he needed to be the facilitator of the conversation. Let's do a round of introductions. Each one can share something they would like to change in the company, suggested Robert, trying to break the ice. Everyone agreed, and the first to speak was Beatrice. I wish we had more opportunities to present our ideas. Sometimes I feel that we are not heard, she said, looking around, seeking support in the eyes of her colleagues. I agree, Beatrice, said an employee named Charles. When I tried to present a new approach to it's frustrating. The mood began to change. Arthur noticed that people were starting to open up. He encouraged them, asking questions and showing that he was genuinely interested in their opinions. How do you feel about the feedback you receive? Asked Robert. Julia, who had entered a bit later, crossed her arms, but couldn't help but listen. Feedback? What we need is discipline. Some people just aren't up to it, she said, her voice laden with. But Julia, it's not just about discipline. It's also about support and growth, retorted Beatrice, now more confident. If we don't feel safe to share our ideas, how can we grow? Arthur felt a chill in his stomach as he watched the action. He knew that Julia would not take well to the challenge, but he was proud of Beatrice for speaking up. Exactly, Beatrice. We need an environment where everyone feels comfortable contributing. I would like to see more collaboration among us, said Robert, trying to reinforce solidarity. Charles, encouraged by the supportive climate, continued. I feel that the pressure for results is creating a hostile environment. Sometimes it's like we're competing against each other, instead of working together. The conversation flowed, and Arthur had the chance to hear stories of frustrations, insecurities, and demotivation. He felt the weight each one carried and realized that, although they were in a corporate environment, their humanity was being suffocated. Robert, if you could make one immediate change, what would it be? Asked Beatrice, curious. Arthur smiled, thinking about how he could transform this situation. I think we need a platform where everyone can share their ideas without fear of reprisals. A way to restructure our feedback system. Maybe that, murmured Beatrice, her eyes shining with the hope of change. We need a new beginning. The breakfast unfolded positively, and Arthur saw how a simple meeting could be the first step towards building a new collaborative spirit in the company. He felt closer to his colleagues, understanding their struggles and challenges. Over time, the voices began to blend into a chorus of ideas and suggestions. Arthur realized that the struggle of Beatrice and the others was not just for recognition, but for a place where they could be valued and heard, and he was determined to ensure that this conversation was not in vain, but the beginning of a silent revolution within Inovatec. Arthur, still disguised as Robert, watched attentively the environment around him as he mingled with the Inovatec team. The next day, he found himself in a meeting where Tyler, the sales director, was about to present the numbers for the last quarter. The atmosphere in the room was tense and stifling. The employees sat in their chairs with nervous expressions, as if they were about to be called to court. As Tyler started his presentation, the arrogance was apparent in every word. "The numbers are below expectations, and that's unacceptable," he said, fixing his gaze on a young employee who seemed especially nervous. "If you can't reach your targets, maybe you should reconsider your position here." The cutting remark echoed through the room, and the young man, with a trembling voice, defended himself. "But, Tyler, I did everything I could. The market is tough and—" "Don't give me excuses," Tyler interrupted, with a disdainful smile. "The truth is you need to try harder. If you can't handle the pressure, maybe sales isn't your forte." The employee's face turned pale, and he shrank in his chair, visibly shaken. Arthur felt a wave of indignation sweep through his body. He realized that Tyler was not just managing a team, he was exerting an oppressive control that was suffocating the confidence and motivation of the employees. "This can't continue like this," thought Arthur, determined to find out more about what was really going on. After the meeting, Arthur approached a group of employees who were chatting in a corner of the office, still under the tide of tension. He introduced himself as Robert and began to listen to the complaints that flowed like a dammed river. "I can't stand the constant pressure that Tyler puts us under," vented a female employee named Carly. "It's like we're always under surveillance. No one feels safe to fail, even though it's a natural part of the process." Another employee, Luke, agreed. "And it's not just Tyler. Julia also has her favorites. If you're not part of her crew, you're out. It's very frustrating to see people being favored without merit." Arthur listened attentively, absorbing every word. He was beginning to understand that the culture of fear instilled by Tyler and Julia was not an exception, but the rule. "That's unacceptable," he said in a grave tone. "You deserve an environment where you can work without fear of reprisals." "Talking is easy, Robert," said Luke with an ironic smile. "But what can we do? If we try to oppose, we'll be eliminated." Arthur looked into the eyes of his colleagues, feeling the pain and frustration reflected in them. "We need to do something together. If we continue like this, nothing will change. It's time for us to come together and talk about this. No one should be treated this way." Carly's eyes lit up with renewed hope. "Do you really think we can change things? That we can unite against this?" "Yes," Arthur replied, convinced. "Change begins with the courage to face the truth, and the truth is that you have the right to be heard and respected." As the conversation unfolded, Arthur realized that there was a growing determination among the employees. They were tired of feeling invisible, tired of being treated as disposable pieces. He knew that if they could come together and share their experiences, there might be a real chance for transformation. But at the same time, he felt anguished. The pressure Tyler exerted on the team was palpable, and the fight for justice would be difficult. He needed to find a way to expose this toxicity without revealing his true identity, as it was not the right time for that yet. What he needed to do was to carefully plan the next steps, building a strong foundation for the change he wished to see in Inovatec. Arthur, disguised as Robert, walked through the Inovatec office, feeling the heavy atmosphere that permeated the environment. Even in his new identity, he could not ignore the subtle discrimination that existed there. In a corner, while organizing some documents, he overheard conversations of colleagues who, unaware of his presence, spoke about. "Do you really think someone like him could lead the team?" said an employee, laughing condescendingly. "That's stuff from movies. It won't happen in real life." Robert felt a chill in his stomach. He was not just an observer, he was the CEO and, more importantly, a black man in a leadership position. The words cut like knives, and indignation grew within him. During a break, he approached Beatrice, who was at a nearby table, typing on her computer. The young woman had a glint in her eyes, but at the same time, there was a shadow of doubt on her face. "Hi, Beatrice. Can I join you?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She looked up, surprised, but nodded her head. "Sure, Robert. I was just trying to finish some things." Her voice was soft, but the tone seemed laden with frustration. "You seem overwhelmed. Is there something you'd like to share?" he asked, trying to create an atmosphere of trust. Beatrice hesitated for a moment, as if deciding whether she should open her heart. "Well, I don't know if you've noticed, but the team really doesn't feel valued, especially those with innovative ideas. Often, I feel that our contributions are just ignored," she vented, the emotion transpiring in her words. Arthur watched attentively, feeling a genuine connection. "Do you really think that's a problem? What kind of ideas would you like to see more respected?" "Yes, definitely. And, actually, I have an idea in mind that could help our product line, but whenever I try to present it, I'm interrupted. It's frustrating, you know." Beatrice's frustration was palpable, and Arthur could not help but remember how many times he himself had faced similar situations throughout his career. "Have you considered talking to someone about this, maybe even in a more informal meeting?" Robert suggested, trying to encourage her. "I don't know, Robert. Sometimes it feels like it's not worth it if I'm not heard," she replied, looking down as if she were shrinking under the weight of her words. "But you must be heard. Your voice is important," he insisted, feeling an urgency to support this young woman full of potential. "Maybe I can help in some way." Beatrice raised her head, surprised. "How so? Do you have power in the company?" "Actually, I'm here to listen and support. I want everyone to feel comfortable sharing their ideas. Let's do something about it. How about an informal breakfast with other colleagues to discuss our frustrations and ideas?" he suggested, feeling that this could be an opportunity to create a safe space for everyone to express themselves. She smiled timidly. "That could be a good idea. Many people are feeling this way, but they're afraid to speak up. I'm sure others would also feel more comfortable in a less formal setting." Arthur nodded, feeling encouraged. "Let's do that. Can you help me organize it? We can make it a space where everyone feels comfortable sharing their experiences and what they'd like to change." Beatrice smiled more broadly now, her confidence growing. "Sure, Robert. Let's do that." As they talked, Arthur realized that it was not just a matter of discrimination. Structural racism was deeply rooted in the company culture, affecting morale and productivity. He remembered his own experiences, how he had overcome barriers, and how now, as Robert, he was in a unique position to make a difference. The conversation flowed, and Arthur felt more connected to the team than ever. He was determined not only to listen to the silenced voices, but to be an agent of change. The journey he had undertaken in search of the truth was turning into something much more significant, and he knew he needed to act not just as a CEO, but as a true leader, committed to creating an inclusive and respectful space. Arthur, still disguised as Robert, felt the weight of accumulated injustices within Inovatec. He knew he needed to act and decided to call a clandestine meeting with the dissatisfied employees. With a mix of nervousness and determination, he organized the meeting in a room next to the cafeteria, a space normally overlooked, where employees could feel free to speak openly. That night, the room slowly filled up. He watched the worried faces of his colleagues, all seeming hesitant, but excited about the idea of finally having a safe space among themselves. Beatrice stood out, her eyes sparkled with expectation, but there was also a shadow of apprehension. Arthur smiled at her, trying to convey confidence. It was essential to create a welcoming environment. "Thank you all for coming," Arthur began, gesturing for them to settle down. "I know many of you have been feeling uncomfortable and demotivated here. This is a safe space for us to talk openly about what's happening in the company." A heavy silence set in, then, an employee from the marketing department, Charles, took the floor. "Robert, the truth is that we're all tired. Julia and Tyler do whatever they want, and whoever doesn't align with them ends up being left out. I've seen it happen to colleagues, and it's simply inhumane." Arthur nodded, listening attentively. "Yes. That's exactly what I want to address. We all deserve a work environment where we feel valued and respected. Would anyone else like to share?" Susan, a young analyst, raised her hand timidly. "I'd like to speak. I had an idea that could improve our product, but when I tried to present it to Tyler, he interrupted me and said that I was just wasting time. It made me feel small and useless." Arthur's expression became more serious with each report. He realized that it was not just issues of leadership, but also the culture of oppression that was rooted in the company. That's unacceptable. No one should feel that way. Creativity and innovation can only thrive in a supportive environment. Tiago, who was not present, was mentioned again, and Arthur noticed the increasing tension. "I know Tiago is a powerful figure here, but we need to unite to change that. Our voices have value, and together we can make a difference." It was then that Beatrice stood up. "Robert, you have no idea how much this means to us. I've always believed that Inovatec could be a better place, but the pressure and manipulation have silenced us. If we have a chance to speak openly, maybe we can really change things." Arthur smiled, feeling a connection forming between them. "Exactly, Beatrice. Change starts here and now. If you feel comfortable, I'd like you to share more about your experiences. The more we know, the more we can act." A murmur of agreement swept through the room, and one by one, the employees began to open up. "Julia doesn't care about the team," said Charles. "She just wants to keep her position. Recently, she gave a promotion that was clearly deserved by someone else, just because the candidate was her favorite." "I heard that too," confirmed Susan. "And it's not just that. If you don't fit her profile, you're out. It's like we're constantly in a war to prove our worth, instead of working together." Arthur felt a wave of indignation rise within him. He realized that the oppression was more deeply rooted than he imagined, and the fight for justice at Inovatec would not be easy, but he was determined to be the voice that would unite these employees. The force that would help them stand up against injustice. "Let's unite," he said with a firm voice. "We need a plan to expose this and bring about change. If we do nothing, nothing will change, and we will continue to be trapped in this toxic cycle. I am here to support you, and together we can turn this situation around." The faces around the table began to glow with renewed hope, and Arthur knew that, despite the challenges ahead, he was no longer alone. The fight for justice began there, in that room, with each of them willing to stand up and fight for a better work environment. Arthur, now revealing his true identity, felt a mix of expectation and nervousness. He had spent days disguised as Robert, an ordinary receptionist, but now he was about to confront his team about the truths he had discovered. The meeting room was filled with employees, all with expressions of surprise and uncertainty. The collective murmur stopped when he stood up, making everyone's eyes turn towards him. "Good morning, everyone," began Arthur, with a firm voice, although his heart was racing. "Today, I want to share something very important with you." He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the revelation. "I am Arthur Vaquez, the CEO of Inovatec, and I spent the last few weeks working as a receptionist in this company, under the name of Robert." A stunned silence took over the room, many employees' eyes widened, while some whispered among themselves, trying to process the information. Julia, the HR manager, was the first to react. "That can't be true," she exclaimed, her voice loud and full of disbelief. "You can't just disguise yourself and watch us without our permission." Arthur raised his hand, asking for calm. "Julia, I did this because I needed to understand what really happens here. And what I found was much more concerning than I imagined." Tiago, the sales director, didn't hesitate to stand up. "This is a breach of trust, Arthur. You don't have the right to treat us like lab rats. What you found may just be a distorted view of reality." "Distorted view?" Arthur replied, his voice rising slightly. "You have no idea what I witnessed. I saw employees being demeaned, humiliated, and treated as if their voices didn't matter. Julia, I heard you say that we needed to eliminate those who. What does that mean for our culture?" Julia turned pale, her hands trembling slightly. "Arthur, that was taken out of context. I was just talking about the need to keep the team focused and united." "Focused on what?" Arthur retorted. "On a toxic environment where people are afraid to express themselves? Where innovative ideas are stifled before they can even be heard? Beatrice, for example, was dismissed several times by Tyler during her presentations. Do you think that's leadership?" Beatrice, until then silent, finally found the courage to speak up. I just wanted to share an idea that could help the company, but whenever I tried, I was ignored," she said, her voice trembling, but determined. "It made me feel like my work had no value." The tension in the room was palpable. Arthur saw other employees nodding their heads, some seeming relieved to finally have the opportunity to speak. "I'm here to listen to you. I'm not just the CEO, I'm also a colleague who cares about the well-being of each of you. The culture you've experienced is not the one I intend to promote." Julia, realizing that her position was deteriorating, tried to shift the focus of the conversation. "Arthur, you can't just expose our flaws without considering the context. We all have pressure to deliver results. That's part of the job." "Yes, pressure is part of the job," Arthur agreed. "But it shouldn't be the pressure that turns our environment into a battlefield. What I saw is not just pressure, it's manipulation and oppression, and that needs to change." He looked around the room, noticing that many were focusing their eyes on him, waiting for an answer. "Today I'm not here to accuse, but to acknowledge that we need a radical change. And that change starts now. I want everyone to feel free to share their stories and experiences, because together we can transform Inovatec into a place where everyone can thrive." The room was silent. Arthur's revelation had shocked everyone, and now his words were beginning to resonate. He realized that, although the road ahead was uncertain, the first step had been taken. The fight for a fairer and more inclusive environment was just beginning, and he was determined to lead that change. Arthur, now with the responsibility of guiding Inovatec toward a fairer future, was determined to promote meaningful changes. He took a deep breath before standing up with a firm look that captured everyone's attention in the room. I need everyone to listen closely. What we've experienced here is not just a reflection of some isolated actions, but a pattern that has taken root in our company culture, he said, his voice resonating with determination. The employees, initially hesitant, began to lean forward, eager to hear what their CEO had to say. I've proposed a plan to reshape this culture. We need an anonymous feedback system where everyone can express their concerns without fear of reprisals, a new promotion system that values collaboration and inclusion, not just numbers, continued Arthur, gesturing with his hands to emphasize his words. Julia, who was sitting in the front row, could not contain her indignation. This is absurd. You're suggesting that we should listen to complaints from people who don't have the same vision or commitment as us. That will only weaken the team, her voice cut through the air, full of contempt. Arthur, maintaining his calm, replied. Julia, what weakens the team is the oppression and the lack of space for employees to express themselves. You know as well as I do that many feel demotivated and invisible. What we need is an environment where everyone can thrive, not just a selected few. Tyler crossed his arms, his expression laden with scorn. And who do you think you are, Arthur? You spent a month as a receptionist and now you think you know more than us about leadership? This is a betrayal to our company. His voice was loud, almost a shout, trying to intimidate his colleagues. The silence took over the room, but it was soon broken by a familiar voice. It was Beatrice, who had watched everything with a mix of admiration and courage. Tyler, maybe you should listen to what Arthur is saying. I myself felt invisible for a long time, and I'm not the only one. The way you and Julia treat people is unacceptable, she said, her firmness echoing through the room. Arthur looked at Beatrice, a smile of gratitude forming on his lips. He knew she was touching on a crucial point. Exactly, Beatrice. It's not about undermining anyone's work, but about creating a space where every voice counts. We need to listen to everyone's ideas, regardless of their position in the company. Innovation comes from the diversity of thoughts, he asserted, with a look that encouraged others to speak up. Other employees began to speak out, one by one. I also felt pressured by Tyler, said a young developer. The targets were impossible, and the only response we got was more pressure. Another employee, a woman from the marketing team, agreed. Julia always favored the same people, while others of us had to fight for a chance to be heard. It's time to change that. The tension in the room began to dissipate, and Arthur felt that the tide was changing. I'm not here to point fingers, but to build. Inovatec can and should be an example of inclusion and respect. Let's work together to create an environment where everyone can give their best. Each of you has something valuable to bring to the table, Arthur concluded, with hope shining in his eyes. Julia, feeling the increasing pressure, tried to discredit what was happening. This is an attempt to destabilize the leadership we already have. We can't just change everything because some feel offended, her voice trembled. But Arthur's determination and the growing support from the employees left her without a foundation. And if that means a better environment for all of us, Arthur fired back, his tone now firmer. We need to have the courage to face difficult truths and create a future that we can all be proud of. With the room now divided, the voices of the employees were beginning to unite. What once seemed a lost battle was now transforming into a fight for justice, and Arthur knew this was just the first step in his journey to transform Inovatec into a place where everyone, without exception, could thrive. Arthur Vaquez felt the weight of the room as he prepared for the final revelation. He had gathered enough information during his experience as Robert and now, standing before his team, was ready to act. The tension in the air was palpable. Julia and Tyler were sitting at the table, with expressions varying between scorn and nervousness. Around them, the employees looked on anxiously, some with hopeful glances, others with fear. "Thank you all for being here," began Arthur, his voice firm and clear. "Today, I'm not just here as CEO of Inovatec, but as someone who cared enough to disguise himself and understand what's really going on inside our company." He took a deep breath, observing the reactions. "As you know, I spent the last month as receptionist Robert, and what I discovered has left me deeply concerned." The room was silent, except for the slight whisper of some nervous conversations. Julia seemed indignant, and Tyler maintained a defiant expression. "You can't do this, Arthur. This is a betrayal of our trust and of our company," Tyler shot back, trying to regain control of the situation. "Betrayal, Arthur? Betrayal would be ignoring the injustices you perpetuated. Betrayal would be letting the oppression and manipulation continue unchecked." "I listened to the voices of our employees, I heard their frustrations and their fears, and more importantly, I witnessed how much you, Julia and Tyler, have contributed to a toxic environment." Tyler interrupted, "You don't know what you're talking about. The targets are challenging, and we need a competitive environment to grow. What you did was a disservice to our company." He stood up, moving towards Arthur, but the CEO remained firm, facing him. "Healthy competition is one thing, Tyler. What you and Julia have created was an environment of fear. I saw people afraid to speak, to present ideas, to simply exist. Beatrice, for example, was dismissed several times by Tyler during her presentations." "That's unacceptable," Arthur pointed to Beatrice, who was among the employees, and she nodded, her expression of determination growing. "And what are you going to do about it? Just fire people? That won't solve the company's problems," Julia challenged, her voice shaking with anger. "No, Julia. What I'm going to do is ensure that this company is a place where everyone has a voice and where inclusion is a priority. And for that, we need to start from the top." Arthur looked directly into Julia and Tyler's eyes. "I'm firing you." The murmurs in the room intensified, and looks of astonishment spread. Julia's eyes widened while Tyler let out a nervous laugh. "You can't do this, Arthur. You need me. I'm essential to your team. Essential for creating an environment of fear and distrust? No, Tyler. What you and Julia have brought to Inovatec is exactly the opposite of what we need. And I'm not alone in this decision. Look around you." Arthur gestured to the employees, who began to stand up in support. "These employees deserve better. They deserve an environment where their ideas are valued, where diversity is not just a buzzword, but a daily practice. And I will not be a leader who ignores that." Arthur paused, observing the reaction of the team. He felt the strength of solidarity among them. "If you fire us, the company will sink without our leadership," Tyler shot back, but his voice already sounded weak, as if he knew he was losing. "No, Tyler. The company will flourish, and I will implement a new promotion system that values collaboration and inclusion. We'll create an environment where everyone can prosper, where every voice is heard and respected," declared Arthur with conviction. The room erupted in applause, and Arthur turned to Beatrice, who had tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Arthur. You don't know how much this means to all of us," she said, her voice choked up. "This is just the beginning, Beatrice. We'll transform Inovatec into a model of inclusion and respect. Let's work to build a culture where everyone feels valued." Arthur smiled, feeling renewed and determined. He had transformed, not just as CEO, but as a true leader who was ready to face any challenge that lay ahead. We've reached the end of this moving story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more reports like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Now, at this moment, there's a playlist of videos on your screen if you want to continue watching these touching stories. Just click on it and you'll be watching. And now, tell us in the comments from which city you're watching and leave your like to support our work. Now, a sincere question: do you agree with what happened in the story? We want to know your opinion. See you in the next video.